Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this virtual informal meeting of Mid-Suffolk District Council Cabinet. I'm Councillor Susie Morley. I'm the leader of Mid-Suffolk District Council and I will be chairing this meeting. The decision to hold an informal meeting has been taken as a result of the current risks relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. As this meeting is now an informal meeting, the Cabinet will not be able to make decisions and therefore there will be no voting on any items on the agenda. Members are asked to debate the items on the agenda and to confirm a steer for each item, which will then be recorded, and decisions may then be taken by officers or the leader under delegation, depending upon that decision. May I remind you of some domestic arrangements? Please ensure that microphones are turned off when not in use. Please do not interrupt other speakers. If you're attending the meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. And please remember to use the chat function only to indicate that you wish to speak and not to post comments or questions. And please note that messages in the chat panel can be viewed by people watching the live broadcast. I would like to remind everyone present that this informal meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you will be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting as a speaker, you are also consenting to being recorded by the Council and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and/or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and the press are not lawfully excluded. I will now ask the Governance Officer to carry out the introductions.
Thank you, Chair. This morning we have attending the meeting Councillor Keith Wellham, Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Dave Muller, Chair of the Joint Audit and Standards Committee. We also have other councillors attending. We have Councillor Andrew Mellon, Councillor John Mattison and Councillor John Field. Of Officer, we have attending the Chief Executive, the Assistant Director for Corporate Resources and Section 151 Officer, the Assistant Director, Customers, Digital Transformation and Improvement, and we also have the Corporate Manager for Policy, Performance and Insight, and me, I'm the Governance Officer. And if I have omitted anybody, please can you let me know now and you can introduce yourself.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Thank you very much, Henriette. I'm now going to move to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair. Would you like me to do a roll call for
yes, please.
Members? We haven't received any apologies this morning, so I'll continue with the roll call.
Okay.
Councillor David Byrne. Are you present, Councillor David Byrne?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself quickly enough.
Councillor Julie Flatman.
Present.
Councillor Jessica Fleming.
Present.
Councillor Peter Gould.
Present.
Councillor Lavinia Haddenham.
Present.
Councillor Susie Morley.
Present.
Councillor Harry Richardson.
Present.
Councillor John Whitehead.
Yeah, I'm present.
And Councillor Gerard Brewster.
Present.
That is, everybody's present, Chair.
Thank you. Item 2 is to receive declarations of pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest by members. Are there any to declare? No, thank you. Item 3 is MCA/21/33, and this is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of December 2021. These minutes will be deferred to the next Cabinet meeting. Item 4 is to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with the Council's petition scheme. Are there any?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. And item 5 is questions by councillors. We have a few questions that have come in. So question 1, I'm going to invite Councillor Matheson to ask his question to the Cabinet Member for Finance.
Chair, I understand that Councillor Mellon has asked the same set of questions essentially, so I think I'd like to withdraw in favour of him asking his questions instead.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Matheson. Question 2 is Councillor Matheson to the Cabinet Member for the Environment. Would you like?
Yeah, that applies to all 4 questions that I submitted.
Okay, thank you very much. And Councillor Mellon, you have question 4 is your question for the Cabinet Member for Finance. And this item is, would you like to ask your question now, and then we'll respond to it under item 10?
Yeah, sure, thank you. Sorry, I think I only adopted one of John's questions, but if I ask mine first, can we have his other ones as the supplementaries? Is that okay?
You can ask one supplementary.
Okay. The question I had is, why is the Joint Audit Committee's reasonable and balanced recommendation on divesting our Treasury investments from fossil fuel companies, which was taken unanimously on May the 17th, 2021, not being acted on?
Thank you, Councillor Mellon. We'll respond to that under item 10. Perhaps I can suggest that in future, so that we don't have this confusion around questions, that all questions come via the Leader of the Opposition, so that then you don't get several people asking the same ones and getting in a bit of a muddle. So
noted. Yeah, noted. Thank you, Chair. Yes,
okay.
It was rather last minute, but yes, we will try and do that.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. So item 6 is matters referred by overview and scrutiny or the Joint Audit and Standards Committees.
No matters are received, Chair.
Thank you. And item 7 is the forthcoming decisions list. Does anybody have any comments? Okay. Can we just pause the recording for a moment, please, officers? Thank you. Item 8 is the Outcomes Framework Report, MCA/21/34. I am the Cabinet Member for Customers Digital Transformation and Improvement. This report identifies the need for an outcomes framework to achieve a golden thread between the corporate plan, the 6 strategic priorities, the service plans and personal plans, and to ensure the corporate delivery plan is delivering the right activities for our residents and their communities. You will remember that we, as Cabinet members, contributed to the development of the outcomes at the Cabinet SLT away day in October, and officers presented the updated framework in December that we are being asked to agree today. The new approach shifts the focus of measurement and reporting away from highlighting activities, outputs, and performance indicators to an emphasis on outcomes that can demonstrate the impact of the Council's strategies, policies, and plans. The framework has the Council vision in Tier 1, followed by 18 strategic outcome statements in Tier 2. This is 3 for each strategic priority. These are supported by a short-term and flexible range of 66 intermediate outcomes in Tier 3 that will form the core of all outcomes and insight monitoring approach. It will help us to make sure we spend our money on the agreed outcomes for our residents and customers. It also seeks to drive strategic change and improvements and provide a golden thread for strategy and business planning arrangements. It is the new performance management approach and the direction of travel for reporting, embedding a culture of performance, challenge and improvement. We are asked to agree 3 recommendations. Agree the first 3 tiers of the outcomes framework as the new strategic approach to measuring performance of the Council. And to note that SLT will work with corporate managers to develop Tier 4 of the framework relating to specific measures, outputs and KPIs, which will follow in tandem with the 2022-23 service planning cycle and future quarterly progress reports on the outcomes framework and the corporate delivery plan. And to delegate any minor changes to this framework to the AD for Customer Digital Transformation Improvement in consultation with the portfolio holder. So thank you, everybody. I would like to call for a seconder for this.
Yes, Chair, happy to second.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Flatman. Questions from members. I'm going to go around the Cabinet first. Councillor Byrne?
No, I have no question just at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Flatman?
No questions, Chair, at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Fleming?
No questions, thank you.
Councillor Gould?
I thought I had a question. I've become slightly nervous in the last minute. Colleagues, it's for Councillor Richardson, and it's really, you made in your introduction reference to a golden thread tying policies and actions together at all levels. I'm very interested to know from Harry. Now we've adopted the excellent wellbeing strategy, how that is influencing, shaping, being taken on by the county's wellbeing board. I'd be just interested to know that.
Councillor Richardson?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Gould. I think there's actually sort of 2 key points that I'd like to emphasise. One is just on that sort of golden thread point, because that's actually something I've been reflecting on when we were producing this outcomes framework, that when we adopted the wellbeing strategy back in September, one of the things that we made really clear was it's not just a standalone document, but something that we wanted to, or the principles and the outcomes and the objectives within it is something we wanted to see embedded across the whole organisation, including all of our other strategic priorities. So I think that's a really important aspect of this outcomes framework, is that it embeds wellbeing right at the core of our corporate plan, exactly as you said, Councillor Morley. In terms of the Health and Wellbeing Board, I think there's a really good opportunity here for us to work more closely with the County Council. There's a refresh of their outlook and their strategy now that Councillor Hicks is chairing that particular board. And I think there's a real opportunity now that we've got this framework, now that we've got the strategy in place for wellbeing, to really define what our offer is to our county colleagues. I know that with our Assistant Director for Communities and Wellbeing, we're already working very closely with some of our CCGs. But then at a ground level, we're also doing a lot of work with the integrated neighbourhood teams. So I think that from Mid Suffolk's perspective, this gives us a really nice opportunity now that we've got this defined and really set out in clear detail how we can make an impact across our district. So I think this is a really exciting opportunity for us. So I definitely think this will help embed our work with those of our colleagues across the health and social care sector. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Richardson. Councillor Haddingham?
No questions, thank you. I'm very happy with the framework.
Councillor Richardson?
Nothing from me, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Whitehead?
Sorry, no questions, just happy to take part in the debate later.
Thank you. Councillor Brewster?
Yeah, the same, Madam Chair. No questions, but I'll take place on the debate.
Okay. Henriette?
Yes, Chair. Sorry, if I may just interrupt briefly. Just to let you know that we do not need a proposer and a seconder in this informal meeting today. So just make sure that we don't need that today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm now going to invite questions from non-cabinet members present. If you could put your hand up, that would be helpful. Councillor Field.
Thank you. Obviously a very pretty framework, clearly expressed. I was just wondering if you had got some firm timescales for the Tier 4 outputs and activities, which seem to be somewhat critical. For instance, wildflower planting enhances the landscape of our districts, but where do we go from there?
I think we're already in discussions about timings on that. Conversations are already happening on that particular item. I don't know whether Councillor Fleming, you've got any insight on the wildflower power.
It was really a matter of principle.
Yes, we've already started having conversations, and they will be ongoing as soon as this framework is approved.
Yeah, I can confirm that we are on target with the wildflower planting, and that our officer Will Bucknell is working with all the relevant communities and parishes that have expressed an interest, including quite a few individuals as well. So I see this as being a very successful programme in the coming year.
So in the wider context, the Tier 4 conversations will be starting as soon as this is finished, as soon as this is approved.
Thank you. And will be completed by?
I don't see this as being something that has a particular completion date, John. It's an ongoing programme.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Councillor Wellham?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you may recall the overview and scrutiny meeting when we first looked at
Keith, can I just ask you to adjust your camera, because I can only see from your nose upwards.
At the top of my head, sorry.
Thank you.
Probably the best part of it. Yeah, we a joint overview and scrutiny looked at the original sort of framework back in January 2020, and I recall asking a question about the outcomes, and when and there was quite a debate about the outcomes at that meeting, and I was told in January 2020 that I would see the outcomes, the list of outcomes, very soon, and now I believe we see them some 2 years later. But so be it. We've got the list of outcomes. But quite a bit of the discussion at that meeting was around getting all member buy-in to almost to anything that the councils put forward. So my question is, what steps have been taken and what further steps will be taken to encourage all members to buy into, firstly, the Tier 3 and then subsequently to the Tier 4 outcomes?
I believe we are planning some workshops around this, but I wonder if Jane is in with us, whether Jane, you can help.
I am indeed.
What the exact format that this will take?
Hi, I am indeed here, Susie. So we already have done a lot of member engagement in December. So we engaged with all parties in both councils in December on the outcomes to date, following engagement in October. So we've already engaged with all parties on the tiers 1 to 3 outcomes, and now as we need to move into service planning, ready for quarter 1 reporting.
Okay.
Chair, may I just come back, and you may recall that the discussion was around the benefit of all member briefings, because the all member briefings at that time were being attended by something less than 40% of all members, and our concern as a joint overview and scrutiny was, how do we get buy-in from the people who don't seem to want to engage and don't attend briefings? And there was a brief discussion around trying to find different methods of engaging with the people who don't come to briefings. Yes. So, I mean, if there isn't an answer to that, that's fine. I'll just leave it there.
I think it's the responsibility of all councillors to engage, and the group leaders have a responsibility to make sure that even if those members are not attending the all-member briefing, presumably amongst our own group meetings, we should be encouraging and soliciting views of our wider groups, and you can provide a horse with water, but you can't force them to drink. So, we do everything we can to make sure that members have access to all member briefings. It really is up to group leaders to make sure members attend. Perhaps I can bring in the Chief Exec at this point.
Thank you, Councillor. I was just going to add, in relation to Councillor Wellham's original question, that the outcomes framework, as you'd expect, is heavily based upon the key strategies that the Council has adopted over the last couple of years. The most recent one has already been mentioned during the meeting, the wellbeing strategy. Of course, all of those strategies have had engagement pre-adoption, but most fundamentally were adopted at full council. So there has been that additional layer of governance or engagement, rather, with all councillors through that process. But I take Councillor Wellham's point, which is that we can always do more, and we can always look to see how we can engage. Although you're right, Councillor Morley, we can't always force them to drink.
We'll do our best, though, Keith.
Thank you.
So if we're now no more questions, so I'm going to open up the item for discussion. So I think again I'll go. No, we'll go to hands up for discussion. I think so. Any cabinet members wish to engage in discussion on this? Councillor Whitehead.
So, sorry, just moving to just changing the windows, and I lost the opportunity to take the microphone off. Right, thank you. I do like this document because any resident reading the report can quite clearly see what our priorities of this Conservative administration are. When just looking at the Tier 2 strategic outcomes, it clearly shows that our focus is on the health and well-being and children having the best start in life, our local economy having strong growth with innovation and creativity, our communities are attractive, successful and connected places for people to live and work. Our residents have affordable and high quality homes. Our customers can access high quality services and support. And we value, enhance and protect our environment. And I mean, these are all very laudable priorities, which I fully support and endorse. But I do think it's a great credit to our officers that they've been able to pull all this together in such a clear, concise and very readable way. That's just my thoughts on it.
Thank you, John. Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I think this is a really good document to work with, and we can see the priorities and how they are being dealt with quite regularly. I mean, looking at my own portfolio, I think that shows everything that I would wish to see happening within that portfolio, and I'm sure that the other ones, other members, would be perhaps, the same. It's a very useful document for cabinet members as well as all the wider community and the wider council force. So yeah, I think it's a really, really good document, and very pleased to see it come forward.
Thank you, Gerard. Councillor Fleming.
Yes, thank you. I must say I'm really impressed with this document. I think it's very clear and it sets things out in a strategic manner that we wish to achieve. It's not intended to provide a lot of detail, and that is obviously something separate, but it gives us a steer on where we want to go. And I just want to, just look at the environment category, where we just to take a quick look at that, if we might. It's on page 26. We've got 3 overarching objectives here: to enhance biodiversity, to reduce the carbon footprint, and healthier, safer and sustainable places. And on biodiversity, I think we know that biodiversity net gain is something we don't just want to do, but we're going to have to do. And my hope is that we will be able to meet and exceed the targets that government is setting us in the Environment Bill. We will, things like wildflower planting and planting trees and hedges, etc. These aren't programs that have an end date. They are ongoing commitments that the Council is making. And I just think that people need to be very clear. These programs aren't a start-stop event. They will continue, providing we have our say in it. Carbon footprint, that is also an ongoing real challenge for the Council, and something where we need to and are engaging with all of our partners and technology providers to be able to meet our obligations, as well as keeping people on board. And I think there's a lot of fear out there about cost and price and affordability, and this is where we have to find the funds and do what we need to do in a way that brings people along with us. And finally, the third bullet I think is really important under environment. That is healthier, safer and sustainable places. And this is part of our health and well-being strategy as well, to open up the environment and and the countryside so that it's accessible. We've had a motion to that effect, and this is something that I'm very excited to be taking forward. So that was just what I wanted to say about the paper. So thank you very much to those who prepared it.
Thank you, Jess. Councillor Gould.
Thanks very much, Chair. Of course, as Jessica's just made reference to the, Councillor Fleming's just made reference to the need to, the importance of finding the funds to continue to deliver this and to continue the work. And it's really on that aspect I wanted to speak briefly. Of course, my portfolio is very much about providing the means to deliver, to help deliver these outcomes. And I'm very pleased and proud about that. If we look, not only as an administration do we have a very clear set of outcomes, which is ambitious, but deliverable. And it's one of the reasons that makes it deliverable is the strong financial position that we have as a council. So I cannot but link this set of outcomes to the strength of our financial position, because many councils can write sets of ambitious outcomes. Few always have the means to deliver them. We are one of those councils, and we should be very proud of that, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. Councillor Byrne?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Byrne, you've gone on to mute.
Don't understand that, sorry.
Sorry, start again.
Yeah, my portfolio planning doesn't have a corporate priority all of its own. One or two portfolios do, but a little like Councillor Gould's, it crosses over many of the priorities and the other portfolios, and I am extremely pleased to see in one or two of these areas items that planning can certainly make a very strong contribution to, and it's a good steer for me to guide the planning service.
Oh, you've gone on to mute again, David.
Why does that keep happening?
It's the gremlins again.
A gremlin, yes, indeed. Anyway, you can still hear me. I don't know where I got to. I'd got to saying that several of these priorities do cross into planning, or at least planning can support them, and planning does support them. I'm particularly concerned or interested in the areas of environment, the extent to which planning can both impinge on and help the environment. I'm also keen to see the housing one. We do support that, and with building control and improvement to the environmental contributions that housing makes in terms of economy of carbon emissions and so on and so forth, we can improve the situation there. But in particular, I'm keen to see that the community's outcomes are assisted as much as possible by planning, and there I think the involvement that the communities can have and do have in the planning process goes a long way towards achieving these. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to build on some of the remarks that some of my colleagues made earlier. And I think touching on some of the things I referenced in terms of the wellbeing strategy being embedded across the whole organisation, what I think this framework really does enable us to do is to think more broadly about the outcomes that we deliver for our residents. So we know, for example, that there are broader determinants of health and wellbeing, and I think linking explicitly the wellbeing objectives that we want to achieve within the broader work that we do as a council is absolutely essential for many of the reasons that Councillor Byrne and Councillor Fleming mentioned, that it's not just one particular portfolio working in isolation or working in a silo. It's about looking holistically at what we as a council are delivering and how we can improve the lives of our residents. And I think looking at this in the whole is going to be absolutely essential to the work that we do. And I think it's a really helpful way of visualising and setting out what it is we want to achieve. So I will definitely be supporting this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Harry. Councillor Flatman.
Thank you, Chair. Carrying on, following on from all that's been said, we do need the finances to make this all work. We don't work in silo. We all talk to each other. We all make sure that everything we want to achieve is achievable, and that at the heart of everything, our communities is what we're here for. And if we can empower them and create the grants and the work, etc., the housing that everybody needs, then we've done our job. And thank you to the officers for pulling this all together. And it's so clear for our residents to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'm really proud of this document, and I would really like to thank Sarah Wilcox and her whole team, and especially Jane Kennedy for pulling all this together. It's a really difficult thing to show in effectively almost a one-dimensional paper, three-dimensional concepts. And several of you have already mentioned that we don't work in silos anymore, and this tiered structure allows us to see across the piece how and where we can most support our residents. You've already mentioned, Councillor Fleming's already mentioned under her environment portfolio about Mid Suffolk being a healthier, safer and sustainable places to live. And of course, that's not just about the environment. That covers our housing portfolio, it covers our communities portfolio, planning portfolio as well as environment. And this gives us a really good three-dimensional view through and enables us all to work together much more closely and less siloed to make sure that these outcomes actually come to fruition in a more cohesive strategy. So I'm really proud of this document, and I'd like to thank all of our officers and all of our councillors who've contributed to every single tiered item within this document. It's a fantastic piece of work. I'm really proud of it. So based upon the discussion, I'm minded to accept the recommendations unless anybody disagrees, and we'll pass that forward to be implemented later. Thank you everybody for your discussions around this item. I'm now going to move on to item 9, which is MCA/21/35, and this is the fees and charges for 2022 to 2023. And I'm going to invite the Cabinet Member for Finance to introduce this report.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm pleased to introduce report Cabinet Paper MCA 2135, which is the fees and charges for 22-23, which starts on page 31 of our report pack. But whilst I remember, I'd like to bring to members' attention, there are within our additional table papers on page 5, 2 changes from the fees and charges set out in Appendix A, and these 2 changes relate to the garden waste collection charges. So for existing subscribers and new subscribers, we're proposing to add £2 to the existing charges, and that's in line with the increase in costs we are facing from our contractor. So the fees and charges for 22-23, which we're recommending today, are to be built into the draft 22-23 General Fund budget. So, Madam Chairman, I'm an avid follower of social media, especially of local neighbourhood groups, as it's a great way of keeping a finger on the pulse of what is of interest and concern to our residents. And inevitably within those, our council services get a mention. And several times I've seen comments along the lines of, all the council does is empty our bins. And to those people, and indeed to members and residents in general, I would say take a look through our fees and charges schedule, which starts on page 39 of our pack, and with its various schedules runs through to page 90. So we've got 52 pages of fees and charges, and in total, those fees and charges are anticipated to bring in an income to the council of £5.1 million next year. And the content pages shows fees and charges in relation to our council services for environmental licensing, for planning, building control, land charges, the green environment, hackney carriage and private hire, premises and other licensing, car parking, and the community infrastructure levy. And some of these are statutory and some are discretionary charges, but together they do highlight the sheer breadth and depth of services that our district council provides for our residents and businesses. And of course, there are many more services we provide for free in the community's public realm: housing, well-being, the economy, the environment, planning and democratic services. So collectively, the council does much, much more than just empty our bins. And clearly this fees and charges income of 5.1 million is one of the major components of our total business income. Many fees and charges remain unaltered from this year, but where changes are proposed, our service managers have reviewed them and are confident that the proposed changes have been benchmarked and have been found to be reasonable and proportionate. If members have any questions on our fees and charges, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So I'm going to go through councillors individually to start with. Councillor Byrne, do you have a question?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Councillor Flatman?
No question at present, Madam.
Councillor Fleming?
No, I don't have a question, thank you.
Councillor Gould?
No question, thanks.
Councillor Haddingham?
No questions, thank you.
Councillor Richardson?
Nothing from me, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Brewster?
No questions from me, Madam Chair.
And do we have any questions from any non-cabinet members? Councillor Field?
Just one to John, I guess. Looking at paragraph 5.5 on page 32, it says The increase of 554k or 12.2%, which is detailed elsewhere. I mean, I'm quite aware that the Treasury is predicting that inflation will go to 6% this year due to the effects of COVID, etc. And we all hope that's it. I just wondered how 12.2% is felt reasonable.
Right, good question. I think if I can just address your attention to Appendix B on page, what page is that? Page 37, because that sets out a large table which shows all the increases. And if you go to the right-hand column, sort of line by line, it sort of shows what those potential increases are. So although we're going from 4.546 million up to 5.1 million, which, as you say, is a 12% increase, there's a whole range there, many zeros, 3%, etc. And I think really it just needs to be looked at line by line. And of course, some of these, when we're talking about the money, we're talking about volume and price. So, we could, some things that are frozen in price can still bring in, say, a 10% increase in fees and incomes, not because we've put the price up, but because the demand is there. So that would be my answer to your point.
Thank you for that. Can I just point out, obviously, the increase in volume is something I'm sure we'd all support. And I did look at your table, which did indicate things like civil parking enforcement with a 66% increase, which did seem pretty dramatic. And there are indeed some significant reductions, which are good to see for all of us, I'm sure. But street name and numbering is a 39% increase, and it would have been good if you perhaps offered the volume and the inflationary increase separately, and then that would ensure that our residents fully understand. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Well, I certainly can't answer those questions immediately, but I take the point you're making.
Thank you very much. So I'm now going to open up the item for discussion. Does anybody want to start us off? Please put your hand up. Okay, so based upon that, I'm minded to accept the recommendations. I've heard nobody disagree. Okay, accepted. Moving on to item 10. This is MCA/21/36 and is the environmental, social and governance considerations for the council's Treasury management investments. I'm going to invite Councillor Whitehead, the Cabinet Member for Finance, to introduce this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Before I start my speech, I think I'm probably best to answer the question that Councillor Mellon withheld over from the questions by councillors section. If I may, on his behalf, just read out that question again. It says, why is the Joint Audit Committee recommendations to divest our Treasury investments from fossil fuel companies, which was taken unanimously, not being acted on? Now, I've no doubt that Councillor Mellon has thoroughly read this report, but for his benefit, I'd read out paragraph 4.21, because I think this does clearly set out the reason. And that paragraph says, it is believed that the discussion and recommendation from Joint Audit and Standard Committee was too narrowly focused on the environmental aspects of ESG, especially fossil fuels, and did not adequately address the wider determinants under the social and governance aspects. So an alternative recommendation has therefore been put forward for Cabinet to consider. So that is my immediate answer to Councillor Mellon's question. I don't know if that's appropriate now for a follow-up question, or whether I should just go straight on to read out my speech.
I think carry on with your speech, Councillor Whitehead, and
okay.
I'll bring Councillor Mellon in when we get to the questions.
Okay, right. So ESG, environmental, social and governance. I think anyone in the financial investment world cannot have escaped just how much prominence and focus this ESG topic has recently been given. I sit on the Suffolk County Council Pensioners Committee as a district council representative, and every commission meeting is preceded with a member training session, and a great deal of training time has been devoted in 21 to ESG. And as vice chair of that committee, I also sit on sessions where pension officers and advisors meet up with individual fund managers, and again, a lot of these meeting times has been devoted to ESG. Quite a lot of time in these training and management meeting sessions have been devoted to the environmental aspects, but certainly not the 95% plus of the committee time that joint audit and scrutiny devoted to the E aspect. I mean, social aspects are important. Social aspects, that covers things like employee relations and diversity, working conditions, local communities and health and safety. And these are important for UK-based companies, and I would say even more so for those operating in the third world. The governance aspects, the G, these are also important. This covers executive remuneration, donations and political lobbying, corruption and bribery, board diversity and structure. And again, I'd say that's important not only for UK companies, but particularly those operating in less developed parts of the world. And therefore, the revised recommendation in paragraph 3.1 recommends that Cabinet monitors all three aspects of ESG reporting and makes changes where appropriate to strengthen ESG performance. Now, the environmental focus of joint audit and scrutiny, and indeed the focus of the initial questions posed by the opposition today, have been on just two aspects of 5 overall aspects within the scope of environmental, namely climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And I want to address those now. I spent some time this Saturday morning actually listening to the recording of May's joint audit and scrutiny meeting, and clearly several members there felt that the appropriate time to make these changes is either now or very soon. The emphasis was on divesting from fossil fuel assets and the risk of stranded assets. I've also done quite a bit of reading for these topics myself, although I can't profess to be an expert in either green issues or indeed investment management. But I say there's been a lot in the press recently. Just this last Friday gone, the major oil group Shell released their third quarter trading update, and that was an opportunity for financial analysts and commentators to give their thoughts. So what did they say? 3 quotes I've picked out. They said, whatever happens, Shell will remain an oil and gas giant for decades. They said Shell shares look to remain worthy of ongoing long-term support. And the average rating of stock market analysts on Shell is strong buy. And what has the press recently said? This another quote. The fact is, for now, the world is still overwhelmingly dependent on hydrocarbons for its energy needs. We're going to need the gas and oil these companies produce for a long time to come. Drive the industry offshore if you must, but by reducing Britain to an investment desert, it only makes us even more dependent on outside forces that care little or nothing about the demand of climate. Another press quote, these are not my words, these are from the press. Hammering big oil will do nothing to help fuel poverty or the climate. And they said by they meant the oil majors like BP and Shell, deserve a little TLC. Yet on all fronts they are treated like pariahs. We'll regret it once they're gone. So there it is in a nutshell. If we and the others in the UK divest of such companies as BP and Shell, it will put us ever more at the mercy of the likes of President Putin or OPEC or other foreign oil companies for our oil and gas supplies. Madam Chairman, it's really a case of national security. Do we want a growing reliance on the goodwill of foreigners when Europe as a whole is short of energy and Russia intends to use its dominant position in gas and oil and coal as part of its diplomatic leverage? I mean, we're already starting to shoot ourselves in the foot. UK gas prices in pence per firm are up from 34 pence at the start of last year to £2.36 per pence per firm by the end of 2021. Our Green colleagues talk about stranded assets in regard to oil and gas. I thought about this during the HGV supply difficulties this autumn, when people were queuing in desperation to refill their tanks. That was mothers on school runs, midwives needing to get to their work. Much needed oil was then stranded at the refineries, whilst the desperate consumer demand continued, and that demand is not going away anytime soon. I mean, to be honest, there's much more I'd like to say, but given the need for brevity, I'll just give one more quote before I wrap up. Net Zero Watch says, "We are heading down a path where blithe promises are made without considering the realities of current technology and the fact that many people in this country will be left colder and poorer." So in terms of these recommendations, which obviously was intending to move if we had a formal meeting, I think we need to concentrate on all three aspects of ESG in our Treasury management investments. And I think we need to rely on our investment experts and the exceedingly well-paid fund managers to aid us in our fiduciary duty regarding these investments. And also, I trust we'll do nothing. I trust we'll do our best to do nothing that will leave our residents colder and poorer. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. I'm now going to see whether we've got any questions. Councillor Byrne.
It's an old hand, I'm sorry.
Okay, Councillor Flatman.
Sorry, Chair, I can't see my hands up, so that must be an old hand.
No, I'm going through asking if anybody's got any questions.
Sorry, sorry, Chair, nothing at present, thank you.
Councillor Fleming?
No questions, thanks.
Councillor Gould?
No questions, thanks.
Councillor Haddingham?
No questions, thank you.
Councillor Richardson?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Councillor Brewster?
No questions, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. So non-cabinet members, if you'd like to put your hand up if you've got a question.
Try to find the way there. Yeah.
Councillor Field?
Sorry, I was trying to do that after John put his hand up, but there you go. Just a brief question. Looking at the gist of the paper mentions that sort of there seems to be a dearth of funds which are have good principles, if you say, and I notice our list here has CCLA and three others, and CCLA, to the best of my knowledge, is an ethical fund, and it does seem to have outperformed the rest quite substantially. So there's sort of a question to John there, you know, how does he justify those points? I have got another report here actually from Nick Reed, the Director of Client Investments at CCLA, and it does, I think, point out that ethical funds can do quite well. So there's, could he say a little bit more about that, perhaps? The other point is that he made a lot of point about him continuing to invest and that oil will carry on for some time. But I know certainly The Guardian has been banging on for some time, as you'd expect it to, saying that it's actually the American high-tech companies which are driving market upwards at the moment, and the ones which scrutiny suggested we pulled out of actually are not doing very well at all. Wonder if he could comment on those 2 points.
Right, okay. Yes, CCLA, I mean, that's a great advert for our CIFCO, really, the sort of performance that CCLA has put in. So, you know, I agree with you very much on that. But of course, it's very much property orientated and has shown a recovery as we come out of the worst aspects of COVID. I mean, I think a lot of these investments, from memory, I think we've put them away, is it 2017, 2018? And obviously ESG is very much I won't say the flavour of the day, but it very much has sort of developed really since that time. But I'm not a Guardian reader. I might be surprised to hear, but although I do occasionally look at their website where they beg me for money. High tech, and high tech is very much US focused, and some of those companies have just gone through the roof. Where so British companies sort of been left behind a little bit. But I think I talked about Shell in my speech, and they're now worth £132 billion. They've actually just overtaken AstraZeneca as the most valuable company in the UK. So if you rank the companies in the FTSE, Shell's number one, and So BP and Shell shares last year went up by over 30%, which sort of beat the index. And bear in mind they're a big part of the index. It just shows that how important those investments were to our performance last year. When I say performance, to performance of the various funds we had. So investment's a very complicated game, which is why I say we leave it to our highly paid fund managers. But on any sort of objective viewpoint, I think certainly shares like Shell and BP have been good investments over the last 12 months and important dividend payers and do an important service. As I said, it was quite clear when the forecourt suddenly ran dry just how valuable and desperate people are for their product.
Thank you very much.
In an environment we could debate, we could talk about that for ages. Some regret, but I'll point out CCLA's main investment fund does somewhat better than their property fund, which is interesting. And I think Apple are worth 3 trillion, whereas Shell are worth 300 billion. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I reckon
I've tried Susie's patience as much as I could.
Oh, you never try my patience, John.
Please think of that.
Thank you, Johns. And another John, Councillor Mathieson.
Thank you. Yes, I was one of the members of the Audit Standards Committee last May when these recommendations were put together, and at that time, Catherine Steele was very reluctant to move the investments because of the size of the loss that would then be sustained. Or would we sustain the loss anyway because the shares had gone down, but she was reluctant to declare this into the accounts, which it would crystallise the loss. So I was a bit puzzled that Councillor Whitehead mentioned the contribution that the particular funds, I think it was Schroders, isn't it? Had been making, and I on the broader point that he makes about the committee not discussing the social and governance reasons, I think that that would be good discussion to have, and I think I would look at the billions of pounds and dollars that have been put in by the fossil fuel industry into lobbying government and media.
Can I have a question?
Yeah.
What is the question?
The question I think that remains is that what is the gain or loss that we would incur if we sold the investments as recommended last May? What's the current position? That was actually one of the questions that I submitted last Thursday or Friday, whenever it was. Thank you.
Councillor Whitehead.
Right. Yes, I was waiting for a question there. And of course, Councillor Mathieson did submit the question. I think it's in the table of papers about the current losses on investments. Yeah, obviously day by day that changes, but it's very difficult really with these pooled investment funds to sort of drill down into the performance of sort of individual stocks and everything. I think comments I'd made in response to Councillor Field in terms of how the oil shares have performed last year. Our Section 151 officer has expressed a reluctance to sort of crystallise losses in these investments while some of them are still underwater. And I think it's the Schroder Maximizer Fund, which seems a bit of a strange name, actually, Maximizer, looking at its performance, but that's the one that's still quite a bit underwater. But I think I certainly wouldn't recommend as cabinet member for finance that we sort of divest of these just to transfer the holdings into ones that are sort of fossil fuel free and mainly for all the reasons I set out in the in my introductory speech. And whilst analysts are still saying that shares like Shell are a strong buy, I think we'd be failing in our fiduciary duty if we did that. But that's my opinion. I accept that we have different opinions within our council.
Thank you, John. Councillor Mellon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just a supplementary question. The risk management table at 8.1 in the report does seem to refer to the original recommendation from the Audit and Standards rather than the new recommendation. And I just wonder whether the Cabinet member feels that the risks of holding on to these investments is reflected there in the table. Thank you.
Did you mean any particular risk in particular, Andy, or do you mean all of them?
Well, I think the risk I'm concerned about is obviously, as John mentions, that some of the funds are, I think his phrase is underwater. Is there a risk of those funds losing further value if we don't divest from them? Thank you.
Councillor Whitehead.
Trying to free up my camera and got so many windows open. No, well, again, it's the they say past performance is no guide to the future, but my own gut instinct, as we come out of COVID and how the economy, well, the global economy is expected to improve, is that these investments should improve in the future. And it's my personal opinion that the more diverse they are, the more the risks are spread out. And if that includes some fossil fuel companies, including the likes of BP and Shell, which are very large multinational corporations, it's my personal view that the risks are reduced rather than increased.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to now open up this item for discussion. Would anybody like to put their hand up? Councillor Muller.
Thank you very much, Chair. Basically, what I would like to say, I have been given the latest figures regarding these investments as of the 31st of December, which I think you might be interested in. With a CCLA property, okay, the amount invested was 5 million, but the actual book value, value is actually currently 5.3 million, and it's actually increased from 5.046 million as of the 31st of December. So that's gone up. With the Schroeder Maximizer Fund, the investment valuation was at the end of September 1.586 million, and it's now 1.662 million. So that's obviously gone up again. The UBS Multi-Asset Fund is increased from 1.831 million at the end of September to 1.841 million at the end of December, and the Investec 91 series diverse income account has gone up from 1.939 million to 1.956 million at the 31st of December. So I accept they're still below the actual amount invested, but at the moment those assets we have are actually increasing in value on the current stock market values. I think that's a really, really important point. I think the other important point we raised at the actual JSAC committee in May was that we recognise that any decision to withdraw funds should be balanced against any financial prudence, because obviously we don't want to make huge losses on the council investments. And I think that's a really, really important point. But I think with hindsight, I think from the discussion we've had from the questions raised today, perhaps in future we must pay more attention to the social and governance aspects and not just concentrate fully on the environmental aspects, which I agree are very important. But I think we need to look at all three aspects. So thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful to have the opinion of the Chair of Audit and Standards with us today. Thank you very much, Councillor Muller.
Thank you.
Councillor Fleming.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I feel I would like to say something on the environmental aspect of ESG and our approach to our investments, and to possibly help to try and respond to some of the questions which Councillor Mellon and Councillor Matheson have put to us earlier. I'd like to speak to 2 points which have been raised. And one is that our approach to ESG encompasses the full intended meaning of all 3 components of the ES and G, and including especially that of environment. And the second point I'd like to just say something on is our approach to investing in the fossil fuel industry, in particular oil and gas. I think we all recognise that climate change poses a serious threat to the destabilisation of global economies in decades to come. A simplistic view of the E in the ESG can be interpreted as climate change caused by fossil fuel production and consumption, and the S in the ESG as diversity, equality and inclusion programs. But, and I've researched this from a number of current sources, this is a very narrow and generally internationally unaccepted definition. The E includes a much broader range of considerations, taking into account a company's utilisation of natural resources, land and water, and the effect of its operations on biodiversity and the environment generally, both in direct operations and across supply chains. And it is this last definition of environment in ESG that this Council intends to follow. The second point, moving on to fossil fuels, and again, please bear with me because there's an awful lot to say on this and I realise time is limited. The core question against a backdrop of rising emissions of global warming pollutants is a simple one. Should today's oil and gas companies be viewed as part of the problem, or could they possibly be crucial in solving it? Now, most of the large integrated energy companies are already establishing ESG policies. They recognise that they must meet ethical and ESG objectives in order to meet their own investor expectations, both here and in America and Hong Kong, etc., everywhere around the world. And they're engaging in a path towards energy transition. You're not going to find BP sitting in 2050 with nothing to do. And I think there will be plenty for it to do. I'll just give a couple of examples of some of the work that oil and gas companies have been doing. ExxonMobil has announced a 4-pronged sustainability framework that includes investing $3 million in carbon capture and storage. BP has invested significantly in wind, solar and hydrogen, and is one of the largest contributors to renewable organisations globally. In 2020, they divested operations and reduced the company's overall emissions by almost 6 megatons, making an initial step towards their stated goal of reducing emissions by 41 megatons by 2050. And finally, Kinder Morgan, American firm, recently formed a new unit to explore green energy, including storage and handling of liquid renewable transportation fuels, such as ethanol, renewable diesel and hydrogen. In the coming energy transition is supposed to be almost complete switch from an energy basis, which gets 80% of its energy from hydrocarbons to virtually none by 2050. To do that in less than 30 years and accomplish the changes that we expect is a very tall order. It is like and is unlikely to work without the participation and financial support of the large players. So in conclusion, what I would like to say is, without the oil and gas industry, transformation of the energy sector will be far more difficult and more expensive, and possibly, and this is not just my opinion, not achievable at all. I therefore see no reason to divest from ethical major fossil fuel linked firms in any sense, and many reasons to do the contrary. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fleming. Very powerful. Councillor Brewster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, Councillor Fleming has just spoken about the areas that I wanted to speak about, but so I thank her for doing that. But I think we mustn't lose sight of the fact that these fossil fuel companies at the moment are working on the sustainable and fuels. And really, if we cut them short now and try to get rid of them, we may well in the future be using or losing the thing we very much want to see in terms of sustainable fuels. So thank you. Councillor Fleming put it so much better than I could have done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerard. So based upon this discussion, I'm minded to accept the recommendations in 3.1. So thank you everybody for that conversation. That's been really, really helpful. So that finishes all the items on our agenda, and the date and time of our next meeting is scheduled for Monday the 7th of February at 10:30, and that will again be a virtual meeting in the same format as this one has been. Look forward to seeing you all then. Meeting is now closed.